Welcome to the Holy Toast Podcast. This is our 4th episode where we seek to find crumbs of wisdom and sips of insight. Isn't that right, Josh?
That's right.
I'm here with my co-host, Josh Thornton, and my good friend, Pastor Darren. He is pastor of Redefining Missionary Baptist Church. We met 7 or 8 years ago.
Feels right.
Yeah, it feels right. Through another pastor friend of mine, and Darren's one of those pastors that I love. Not only is he an intellect that I admire and I look up to, but he's also very relatable. So I can talk about Jesus, which he's very serious about, in the kingdom of God, but we can also, talk about Pink Floyd and Depeche Mode and
Yay.
Prince and stuff like that. So I thought this episode we talk a little bit about the African American church and the Caucasian church, I guess, and some of the differences and similarities, and get into other stuff about what that looks like and how we can work together. Good to have you, Darren.
Thanks for having me.
Could you start us off talking a little bit about how you got into ministry and at Redefining?
Yeah, I'm a church kid from day one, and because I was a church kid, I loved the church. I've never not been part of the church. Just had no interest in being a pastor because I was close to it. So I wanted to do other stuff. I think at the time I had an incomplete theology that suggested that working for the kingdom meant working for the church. So I felt like I had to leave the church in a sense to do some of the things I really wanted to do. But it's funny, everything that I did subsequent to graduating from college led me right to where God wanted me to be. The short answer is, after I lived in Atlanta in my late 20s, and so broke up with a girl, moved to Houston, met another girl, got married, and then adopted a girl, and then we came back. We moved to Arkansas, was part of a church we really enjoyed. We came back to Houston and wanted to find a church that was a lot like it. Found one in Spring. And then things happened really fast. I got involved in ministry at that church in 2009. And by 2011, I was the associate pastor. And then the pastor resigned in 2012. And then I was the pastor in 2013.
Wow.
I had gone to seminary, but I was just content really being more of a lay leader. I always had the sneaking suspicion that if I told people what was, kind of bubbling in my heart, things would probably accelerate outside of my control. So I didn't say anything. But everywhere I went, I was always involved in Sunday school or some type of ministry. But I think everything came together in Spring, and it just really felt organic. I didn't campaign. I didn't apply. In fact, in my pastoral interview, I think I tried to give them reasons not to pick me, but it didn't work. And but it's every day I get confirmation that it was the life I was supposed to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it seems like I guess you started around the same time I did, and as far as senior pastor goes, you were 2012, you said?
Yeah, 2013.
2013, okay. I was the end of 2012 when we started the Haven.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
have you preached before or anything before taking leadership there?
In 2000, I started preaching there semi-regularly in 2009.
2009.
Okay.
But had you preached anywhere prior to that?
No.
No,
I was always the Bible study teacher. I would participate in things, but I was never the pulpit guy.
Mm-hmm.
Just never.
Yeah.
I started in 2000.
It's crazy too, because he's one of my favorite preachers.
Really?
Of course, it's been a long time now. Time flies. I forget how much time. It's over a decade now.
It's been a long time.
So it has been some time. It's not like it was yesterday, but sometimes it seems like yesterday to me. Sometimes it's.
And when you talk about, you're talking about how Black churches function. My story is atypical. You don't normally walk in the door, kind of slide into that spot and then become the pastor like organically. Usually there was a search, but I was the first candidate they considered. And the attitude about it was I would have been totally not bothered if they had picked someone else, because I still had a part of me that knew my life was going to change if I did that. But it was one of those situations. That was my own personal, the story of getting and putting the fleece on the ground. That was my version of it. Because I knew I was not, I think in a sense, I was not going to help God out in that case. He was going to airdrop me right into that spot before I was going to believe.
Were you on staff there?
I was.
You was?
But I felt like the pastor at the time had a long runway. He wasn't trying to leave anytime soon. And I always thought that there were going to be other candidates. I always thought I would have been a good number two. I like working in the shadows behind the scenes. I'll do whatever you ask for. I just didn't really want to be the face of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Did you have any fear, or were you reluctant?
Oh yeah, completely. I don't really like being the center of attention. I don't really like, my natural bias is toward introversion. Being the person that everything revolves around, constantly having people have access to you, or needing things from you, and being the person that makes the decisions and things like that. It's not natural for me. And so I think the pastorate, especially in the Western context, goes against everything that I'm good at. In fact, I remember they were doing a leadership survey. I forgot which one it was, but it was one of those that measures you across 8 quadrants. And they had 4 that they wanted, and I was the opposite 4. I was the exact opposite 4 of what they wanted in the leadership profile. And actually, I was like, great. They'll pick somebody else. I'm not really what they want. But a lot of those things are, I think, waking up. I think that they give me the ability to wake up every day and be myself in it. But they don't expect me to be like someone else. So that's helped a lot.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah. Sounds like God had other plans too.
He did.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to some of the other subject matter, how about we pray and toast?
Oh yeah, we're supposed to do that.
Josh, you want to lead?
Sure.
All right.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we get to come together and just talk about life and how wonderful it is and what you've given us. And we thank you for Pastor Darren and his heart and him willing to come on and share his testimony with us. And I pray that you bless him and his church and all his endeavors. And we love you, praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Let's toast.
Amen.
Man.
Sweet. This is a good one. Decoy. Sounds fancy.
That's pretty good.
It's good. Smooth.
Scott, you totally had nothing to do with this, I know.
I forget the stuff I bring. It's like $13, I think. Get it at Kroger HEB. Wanted to start off with a little bit of, I don't know if it'd be, I guess, a little fun to talk about, at least in my mind. It would be just kind of the different cultures and black and white churches. Even in saying that, it feels like a stereotype, but we're going with it. Stereotype, yeah. We're embracing the stereotype and this difference in the worship styles in black and white churches. How would you describe the worship style in black churches?
Well, you said the important thing. I think that it's more of a culture. I had a conversation with my nephew last night. It was actually pretty enlightening because he grew up in the same church I did, which is what you would think if you were trying to draw up, a straw man for a black church. It would have been mine. the way the choir sang, the way the preacher preached, who was in there. It was all of those things. But my nephew would tell you that he probably would not go to a church like that today, because what he's looking for in terms of way was communicated, how issues are dealt with, would be different than what they did then. And so I think culture is probably the predominant thing, because even within the broad community of the Black church, it's different. Our church, has a worship style that's it's unique to us. But when I go visit my friends, even though it looks the same, you can tell the differences with the types of, like, our church has a choir. Some churches do praise and worship music. Some pastors, they wear robes every Sunday. Fairly high literature for Baptist churches, things like that. Some are fairly informal on Sunday. Some preachers still do the celebratory clothes. But there were a lot of preachers in my generation. Tony Evans and his style was what they were drawn to. So you see that. So I would say that there's a lot more fragmentation now than I've seen. And I think it's difficult because if you're not immersed in it, you won't see it. Usually the churches that get elevated are the ones that are really large. And sometimes we can apply that broadly. Well, this is what the Black church is. Well, it's just one. It's one congregation.
Yeah.
And sometimes where they're located, the neighborhood, the socioeconomic demographic of the congregation, all those things play into what that looks like. So I would say probably, if you look at the median, a lot of Black churches look a lot like what we would say white churches look like, because we're starting to move, the cultures starting to have a lot more overlap than they did.
Yeah.
They're moving toward each other. So when you've come to our church, I've never had people complain about the way you preached. Nobody ever said, don't bring him back.
Yeah.
Right? I think you could see in the response, they understood what you were talking about, related to it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a difference between what people prefer and what they'll accept. And I think for us, I've kind of moved. I grew up in that style, but I'm not wed to it.
Yeah.
I think it's how I feel that day.
Well, hearing you preach, now shoot me down if I'm ever off or whatever. Hearing you preach, I feel like you're definitely not, you and I aren't the same style of preacher, but I would say you and, for instance, our friend Karichi, he'll kill me if I get his name wrong, Karichi, have completely different styles of preaching. So that's why I opened up with it being a stereotype, because I know that there's a variety of different styles of preaching. I've told you before that I feel like when you preach, I feel like it could be a chapter in a book, just the style that I've.
It's interesting you say it, because if you look where we're located, there are like 3 churches within like a 400, 500 foot radius. Like 3 of us are right there, basically have the same corner. But people ask, how can that be? Because we're nothing alike. I think that if you couldn't pick one of us and say, well, you pick one of us and you basically get the same thing. We're different. How we worship, how we're structured, all those things, our backgrounds, how we approach pastoring, they're all different. And I think the people who join them know they're joining something that's different than the one across the street. Even though maybe if you were just looking at us from a surface level, you probably would think that we're a lot alike, but we aren't. And I think that's what works. And I think that is the part that people, often miss, was that there is as much diversity in the black church as there's ever been. And I think that's good because our culture has kind of fragmented a bit and assimilated into broader culture, the expectations of people are different. So it is as much about, you can either decide we are this way and people who want this will be drawn to it, or you can really just understand who is in your community and appeal to that. And we have the exact same challenges everyone else has when it comes to that. We're not immune from it.
Would you say are the younger people looking for something different than the older generation?
I think they are. I mean, I think, again, talking about the conversation last night, there have been polls, whether it's Bonner or Pew or anyone that does research, talks about how anxious Generation Z is particularly. And you can't just tell them, God's going to make everything okay. You're just not worried. That's dismissive. They have legitimate reasons to be anxious. There's a lot that doesn't work for them. And, they didn't grow up in the same world. We grew up, Scott, in a world where I could literally believe what I saw on a video. That was that person saying that thing. And they looked like that because there was, Photoshop wasn't widely circulated. There was no ability to do deep fake videos. People didn't really alter their voices. We grew up in a world where, for the most part, we could believe what we saw and we heard. They can't believe any of it. And not to mention all the things that come along with social media. So we have to recognize that they need the bedrock and the foundation that we had moves under their feet, if it's there at all. And you have to talk to them like that's a real thing. Though it may not be real for you, it is real for them.
Yeah.
And so I think preaching to people who did not have to be convinced of their faith or had different issues, it's not the same for them. I grew up, and the pastor and the leadership there were from the civil rights generation or post-civil rights generation. So what mattered to them matters slightly less to us. And I think that we have to be careful as Generation X not to make the same mistake of the pastors or leadership of the previous generation that we criticized. So I think all that to say, we can't be dismissive of the particular context they have and their issues. And we can't say that they're not real to us, they just aren't real to them because they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
I think news travels so fast now too. Like
Absolutely.
we're hearing things across the world that we probably wouldn't have heard about back in the day, and so we're hearing all these tragedies and we're flooded with them and bombarded with them. So I think that contributes to a lot of the anxiety that people face today.
Not just that, we're probably bombarded with people's narrative. You just talked about narrative in the social media post yesterday, but the narrative hits as quickly as the event did. So let's say, the president's been signing a slew of executive orders. The narrative is actually ahead of what he actually did.
Yeah.
Right? And if you inhabit an echo chamber, all you've heard is the narrative around what he did, not what he actually did.
Right.
So, and that's normative. That's how it is 24 hours a day for them.
Yeah. What's the demographics like in your church, age-wise? And
we are a legitimate multi-generational church. I think just this year, I think we've had, we're right around 300 people. We've had 14 people join this year, and the majority of them are under 35.
Okay.
And I think, and so that puts me in a pretty good situation to be able to talk to them, to talk about what is. In fact, this weekend, there are two young men at my church, and both of them were having a difficult time, and both of them told me that it's dealing with anxiety, and they've said it. So when I sit down, one of the things when I think about a text on Sunday, it's always in the back of my head. I'm preaching to some really anxious people. I'm preaching to some really anxious people. Well, I'm preaching to some really anxious people because the young people don't mind telling you. And I think the older generation, it's probably anathema to admit any weakness like that.
Right.
But I know it's there.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that's helped me is, I know exactly what's going on with them. Somebody had told me one time, they said, Pastor, how do you know, what to say to us on Sunday? I was like, y'all tell me. I'm listening to your conversation. I'm watching what you post. I'm taking it all in. Usually, there's not really often a Sunday where some of them aren't at the house. And it's not Bible study. They're just talking about life. And you hear them talking about the things that bother them. And so all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, right, how does what I'm getting ready to talk about on Sunday affect that?
Yeah.
It's not that complicated. I'm just listening.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's segregation in the churches between black and white? Or do you think it's just a culture? We go where we kind of feel comfortable or where we feel like we fit in?
It's a little of both. I think that the segregation is based on comfort. And in America, culture is often equated with skin color. Right? We probably have sometimes as much in common with my white friends that I do with my black friends, but I think in America it's just the default switch. So it's easier to do that, and I think that people don't like being uncomfortable. One of the things about a black church, especially if you are a working professional, the Sunday morning might be the only time that you are in a majority situation for a lot of us. So sometimes Sunday morning is that, right? But then it's also the opposite. If you've been in the majority all week, Sunday might not be the place you want to be in the minority, right? And I think that we don't, Dr. King said that 11 o'clock was the most segregated hour in America. And if you think about it, if you live, in this part of town, you shop in a multicultural context, your kids will go to school in one. There's not a white HEB and a black HEB.
Right.
But on Sunday, when you get to make the choice, we typically choose that which makes us comfortable.
Help me out, Darren, because in my notes I made a note about racial diversity and whether we should have it in individual churches. It's something I've thought about a lot, and I'm very curious about your perspective. Because one thing, I've always assumed we need as much diversity as possible, and then I've kind of backed off of that recently, but I'm very curious to hear your perspective. I think about within stereotypical white churches, but you go from Methodist to Presbyterian to Baptist to Pentecostal, you're gonna experience different cultures. And even within that, like non-denominational churches, we take on a culture, a subculture of our own from church to church. So yeah, it makes me curious. Should we seek as much racial diversity as possible in the church, or is it fine the way it is?
I would tell you, I think I saw somebody post something that said, in effect, that the vibe is different now. I think that's a very difficult conversation to have now with where we are, because it feels that the entire conversation around that is cynical now. People's motives, I've been questioning. I think it's interesting that it comes from you, because I think Generation X was the first ones, I think, en masse to try to pursue racial diversity in churches. So, again, I was raised by those that come out of the civil rights movement. The world we went into was different. But I think a lot of us wanted to pursue what we read in Ephesians and what we read about what the church would be like in Revelation. And a lot of us paid a price for it. And when I say us, I mean the people who tried, not black ones or white ones, anybody for whom that was a burden. They paid the price that a lot of people who are early adopters tend to pay. Whoever goes first usually gets killed, right? So they were viewed by suspicion by the culture they were part of. They were viewed by suspicion by the culture they went to. And then I think it was always affected by what was going on nationally in politics. And so I think that a lot of the people who really wanted it were processing a lot of trauma now. Because, and so I think they would say, if you asked me, somebody asked me the other day if I would talk about it, and I thought about it a lot. So this is what I would do. And this is kind of what I'm telling the church. I think we should pursue biblical objectives and see who shows up with you. So when we began the year, I told them that, just like the Bible, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly, right? And that we're going to really give some thought to the Sermon on the Mount. And I figure rather than pursuing racial diversity, if we pursue the Sermon on the Mount, whoever is there with you, those are your people.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I feel about it.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
That's who your people are.
Yeah, love it. I feel like the question too, we talk about in the civil rights movement, and then now, not that there's not a lot of overlap, so I'm not trying to downplay that as well. I think you got to ask the question is why are you in one church over the other? Is it because of race or bigotry, or is it for the wrong reasons, or for the because a lot of people I think choose one church over the other for stylistic differences as well, and so that's why question came up for me a lot. Just wonder how much is just subculture, how much is familiarity and or not wanting to be around people that are different than you, and how much is stylistic differences. And I'm not sure. I don't know if I can answer that from one person to the next.
I think it's all of those things. Look, I'll be the first to tell you that there's a style, a worship style and a culture that I just prefer. The songs we sing.
And nothing wrong with that.
That's right. That is, again, that's within the black church context itself. It has nothing to do with anybody else. It's just about what we prefer, what we've been socialized with.
Yeah.
What gets it done for us. I will say that just like any other group, we have to be careful about certain idol building. I mean, we're black Christians. God made us black. But when we get to a point where being black is more important than being Christian, we've got a problem. And we have to always be careful to police that, internally. There are certain things that affect our community. Like you asked about certain things about the black church. Some things are that there's a certain way of looking at the scriptures that appeal to us because of the situation that we were in. We read Exodus differently than other people do, simply because of the story. The idea that God cared about some people that were enslaved and came down to do something about it. That gets it done for us. And that might not be as relatable to other people because you can't necessarily go back 3 or 4 generations and know people for whom that was true. So we So a lot of times our songs, the homiletical style, the hermeneutic approach was largely built on helping people make sense of the situation they were in. I always felt that one of the things that caused me to know that Christianity was real was that the Christianity was passed down to us through generations, and they never blamed God for what happened to them. You didn't see, my parents, my older siblings lived in a segregated America, and they never turned their back on God because of it. They never blamed him. They never said, "Where is he?"
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I know, excuse me, that Christianity, that God was in it, because all of the human instincts in you would abandon the Christianity where you felt like God was allowing this kind of thing. So I think one of the things that we have to do in this moment is probably recapture what it was that caused them to believe that whatever was happening to them was part of a larger narrative that God was doing. Right? I think that's the best parts about the theology I grew up with, was understanding that God was up to something, that you may not see it, you might not understand it, but your faith held because you knew that whatever he did was good and right, and then there was going to be a moment where you understood it, and because he was going to make all things new.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with that. That's just why we never freaked out. Because I can look back and say, my grandfather didn't freak out. I lived way better than he does.
Yeah.
Right? How do we hold that together in this moment? And I think that's probably, I think as we prospered, I think we lost some of that. I think when we got to a point where now we have access to, we have wealth and we have education and we have all the other things, and sometimes they became functional gods for us. And I think that in this particular moment, one of the things that God is doing is calling us back away and causing our functional gods to fail us.
Mm-hmm.
The political power isn't going to do it for you. Money isn't going to do it for you. All the things that we felt that we were trying to gain an American dream are failing us. And I think the best parts of the Black church was that we thrive spiritually without any of those things. And we need to rediscover how to do that again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, Darren. One question I definitely wanted to get to in our time together, you and I actually talked about privately in our conversations, but I think came to you with the question of political differences between African American Christians and white Christians, and I think probably from a lot of white Christian perspective is trying to sort out and understand why a lot of blacks vote more Democrat, because I think from a lot of white evangelical perspective is that the conservative holds more Christian values, and could you speak about that a little bit?
Had the conversation with a friend today that did not know I was coming on this podcast. He talked about a couple things. We said that, first of all, Black Christians are like really conservative. When the president made the comment about there are only two genders, we were like, of course, we're offended by that. And the question becomes, and then we said, if you lay down the agendas for both parties based on our values, we probably would pick Republican agenda just on values. But I think that people miss is we often vote based on who we feel will harm us the least. Now, we don't really have a sense that somebody is really going to work for us.
Yeah.
But what we try to sort is who will harm us the least.
Mm-hmm.
We can, like some of the progressive agenda of the Democratic Party it just doesn't touch us. Like in our communities, like some of the things that are just really excessive, we just don't see it on a day-to-day basis. Nobody comes in our churches trying to push transgenderism. Nobody's asked me to marry a gay couple, right? No one has ever asked me to do that.
Yeah, me either.
Right. So we hear about it, but it's not something that sits on our front door, right? And then you have to also understand that people will say, you guys really depend on the government. Well, people have to remember, America had all the years since Reconstruction to dismantle Jim Crow, give black people the right to vote, and they didn't. Lyndon Johnson, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, things like that. So we came to the idea that good people won't do it on their own without the coercive force of government. Because when they had the opportunity, they chose not to, so we entered the government, right? In fact, Martin Luther King's, when he wrote letters at Birmingham jail, he was basically saying, how is it that we can believe in the same gospel and the same implications that the gospel has, and yet you're okay with this kind of stuff happening to us, right? So the government became a coercive force just to say, like, it doesn't end racism, but it limits the harm. So that's what it is for us, with votes. We're concerned. Like, for us, it's a concern. Day after the election, a lot of black children got text messages saying a white man will be over at your residence to pick you up to bring you back to the cotton fields, right? And the question for us is, what is it about this administration that makes people like that comfortable with it? Right? George Bush was conservative, but Nazis didn't love him. And we didn't get messages like that when he was president. And what concerns us is, like, why not that the president is condoning it, not that his cabinet is condoning it, but it seems like a lot of the dark forces in this nation have coalesced around this administration and feel empowered. And that's concerning to us, because how can we be comfortable in a party that makes them feel comfortable about being there?
So it's not necessarily, at least in this instance, it's not necessarily directly the party itself. It's the people that
Surround the party.
surround the party, support the party.
Right. I mean, I don't think if you just talked about what the bedrock principles of what we thought conservative was, limited government, those kind of things, not to like about that, right? Nothing to like about lower taxes, nothing about business-friendly environment, nothing to like about that. Parental empowerment and education, nothing to dislike about that. Nothing. In fact, we don't have a problem with, we believe in strong borders. We think that people shouldn't be here illegally because it's breaking the law. Nothing on the surface is problematic, right? In that platform, not a single thing. How it is applied, could be some nuance there, but just on its surface, none of that's a problem, right? And I think when you look at old guard Republicans, what they would call the Rockefeller Republicans, you had a lot of black participation in that particular version of the Republican Party because those things were fairly straightforward. And I don't think that, I do think that there's everybody is weary of the identity politics, including black people. We don't want to talk about, our blackness all the time as the lead for things. But then we have to deal with the fact that if we bring up an issue, it's CRT. And if we got hired, it's because it's a DEI. And if we talk about something, we're woke. And so you have all of this, and so all of a sudden it's like, well, that's not true either. So how do we find balance there? And of course, it's a political football for both parties, but there are real people getting harmed in the middle.
Yeah.
right? Again, most people that are in HEB are not thinking about DEI, CRT, or how woke something is. They're trying to make it day to day.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, at the political level, I think that a lot of those struggles are not necessarily mainstream concerns, but they are affecting them. They are driven down and pushed down to mainstream, and they affect the people, how people live every day, and it causes, if they're not handled properly, they cause wedges in people that don't need to be there, because we can't have honest conversations about what things are actually like.
It's hard to have honest conversations
It is.
in our day, man.
Mhm.
Everything's a buzzword.
Yeah.
And I've even talked to, something like white privilege, for instance, is as soon as a term comes about, it becomes a buzzword. And within a short period of time, it means something completely different to
Right.
two different people. And I believe this isn't the answer, the be-all answer by any means, but I feel like we've got to do the work of constantly redefining and explaining what we mean and stuff, because in our highly emotional, triggered society, it's almost impossible to have those conversations. We're just in the world is smaller, media, social media, all that stuff comes into play. Kind of goes back to the we've got our own little bubbles that we're in, and it's kind of hard to get out of it and cross the line and have those conversations.
Yeah.
Pastor Darren, you mentioned something about critical race theory. Would you define that for us today, and then how it's relevant?
I really don't know the academic definition of critical race theory. I don't know most of the people that throw it out actually do. I think my point for bringing it up was that it was just a catch-all. Critical race theory, what I understood it to be, was an academic discipline that was normally taught at the graduate school level. Most people that I knew that only had exposure to it were people that had gone to law school, right? So what I do know was that nobody in elementary school was learning CRT. And I know nobody in middle school or high school was talking about it. What was disingenuous about the conversation was that it was a way to shut down conversations about race. And people would intentionally say, if somebody brings up this, we're going to call it CRT. And whether or not it's true or not, as you said, about these terms, whether it's true or not, we're just trying to win the culture war around it, right? And so I think that's the thing, because I think I'm one of the few people that would just say I have no idea what it is, and I'm not even sure how it came to the forefront. But what I know was that it was a highly specialized academic discipline that most people will never encounter a single day in their lives.
Yeah.
Right. It was just a cudgel to bludgeon people into not talking about something. Most of the people that called things CRT didn't tell you what CRT was, right? Mm-hmm. I heard a very bad definition for DEI the other day that I know wasn't correct, but it's it is the way that people are choosing to operate from it. And I think where we are now, because that is the way things are, I think people feel like they have too much to risk to go against, where that conversation is going. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like people will just abandon their principles about it to keep from having a war declared on them. And I understand it. I understand why people are doing it.
Yeah.
I just think it's very dishonest about how things are being handled. And I think that creates a lot of the cynicism that you have today. To the question that was asked earlier, why pursue anything around diversity if that is what you're going to step into?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
I watched a sermon. You mentioned Tony Evans. He preached one on critical race theory, and I thought he explained it very well. And from what my understanding was, if it's more about systems and procedures put in place government-wise, to keep people of color behind, to make it harder for them. And it was a very eye-opening. I learned a lot from it. It drove a lot of conversation between my dad, because he grew up in the 70s, and just talking about these things, that racism still exists. And no, it was a very interesting sermon. So that's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I'd heard about when he talked about it. I think that it, just from the way you explained it, that is not something that is happening in people's schools all the time.
Yeah.
People are not having a conversation at that level. And I'm always, I'm just, as a person that went to school and is very zealous about making sure people get things correct. Whenever someone always asked me about it, I always refer to people who actually knew about it all the time. This is the field they inhabit.
Yeah.
There are people, in academic institutions who live this every day. And it's interesting. It's not new, but it's only really been in the last 5 or 6 years that we talk about it all the time. And the question is, what was happening before, when this was regularly part of things that people did as part of their academic lives all the time? And the question I would say is, why is it a problem today, all of a sudden, right? But I think that it is important for people to understand probably more why all of a sudden these things they talked about. You talked about the reappropriation of terms. My brother is close to 70 years old, and woke was a term they used all the time ago. It was just an idea about stay woke, stay alert, stay aware. So for us,
Now it's changed the definition.
right. So all of a sudden now we don't recognize like this application of woke.
Yeah.
Something none of us recognize. Because it was never the point.
I've heard somebody recently saying, well, woke means this, it doesn't mean that. And I'm like, well, today it's taken on a different meaning. Just like so many of these terms for different people,
Yeah, and then, but that speaks to, so truth doesn't matter anymore. That people can just take a term and define it to mean what they mean. They can take it, reappropriate it with no consequence. Now, I've decided that woke means this. I've decided that woke is bad. And if we're doing that, then we're in a lot of trouble. The things have to mean something.
Are individuals, honest question, are individuals redefining the terms, or is maybe our tribes as a whole redefining the terms within that society or that subculture or whatever, and then it gets swept up? I mean, I guess, would you say the majority of people who hear the term woke, do they understand the original meaning, or do they, you know what I'm saying?
It's funny, the people who use the term all the time, to me, are the people that don't understand it, because the people who understand it never use it.
Yeah.
It's not something that we just run around saying. It was understood. If you told me in 2008 to stay woke, I wouldn't know what you meant.
Yeah.
Just stay aware. It's no. If you were on guard duty and I told you to stay woke, you know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
Stay on guard, stay vigilant, watch out. That's all it ever meant.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we used a lot, but the people who elevate it now are elevating it as a pejorative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, the worst thing that can happen now is something gets called woke.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't even have to be in the proper context. It's just a label. And that label sends a signal to the people who want to believe the worst thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want you to not like something, I'm going to call it woke. Right? If you are part of that group of people who think woke is the worst thing in the world, it doesn't even have to make sense. I just have to call it woke, and people will just assume that. Like people people talked about going on a plane and seeing pilots and saying they were DEI hires. Like, have you any idea what it takes to become a pilot?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't just wish that.
Yeah.
Right? You have to go through things to fly planes.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are if you're speaking in bad faith, to undermine doubt in it, you just label it.
Yeah.
Right? And it happens the other way. You know, if I don't like something that you did, and I know the worst thing that can happen to you is to call you a racist, it shuts down every other thing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You will never be given an opportunity to explain your position. And there will be people who will be suspicious of you because of your white skin, and that will be, then their confirmation bias kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
I've already decided that white people can't be trusted. And now somebody who I respect is calling you a racist. That's it. That's ball game. Right? So there's this is where we are. All right? I mean, if I can't win the argument on the merits, I'm going to give you a label.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to prove that label doesn't fit. You didn't do anything, but you have to prove that what I said wasn't true.
Yeah.
Guilty. You don't get the presumption of innocence.
Yeah.
Going back to, like, for instance, I brought up earlier white privilege. I feel like a lot of people in white culture, when they hear that word, now I've come to understand the term through conversations and dialogue that I've had, or what's meant when it's meant in goodwill. But what I hear from white friends, I guess, is, not speaking for them all, but is that they hear that people are saying that they have they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and so a lot of them that've gone through tough times or whatever, they're offended.
Mm-hmm.
They're offended by the term rather than understanding we've gone through different experiences than black people, and so I guess that's where I don't know. Sometimes I feel I know in Christ I have we have hope, and I'm gonna keep working towards that hope. But just in conversations I've had with my black friends and conversations I've had with my white friends, it's just sometimes it's hard to see how we're gonna overcome this. And it goes back to something you said way earlier, talking about anxiety. There's so much anxiety that I don't know. It's just hard for me to see on a broad basis those conversations happening.
This guy always was one of the most courageous people I knew. He would always ask questions. He would ask them on social media, and I would just go get my bag of popcorn because this is about to be fun. But I always commended him for not just giving in to the cynicism, because I wouldn't even ask him. But you legitimately wanted to understand. And I think that the hopelessness you feel about it is exactly what I feel. But I think that there's a gift in that, because I think the gift in it is that we can no longer make ourselves responsible for an outcome that only God can generate. And I think when I feel hopeless is because I try to take on responsibilities that only God can do.
Yeah.
And so I've had to back away from that and say, well, what can I do? Right? Just literally what Paul said. Somebody has to plant, and somebody has to water, but God's going to have to give the increase. And I think that nothing excites God more than a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
Right? We all at our wits' end. I think we all want what's best for the kingdom. I think we all bring our humanity to it, our flaws and our biases and lived experiences. But I also believe that if it was possible to ruin the church, we would have done it already. That God is holding this thing together, and He's tackled a whole lot of things more difficult than American society.
Amen.
And you can handle that too.
Yeah.
Well
Right.
said.
Very well said.
I just think that we have to just be on the right side of the equation when that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I appeal to.
Yeah.
Well, Pastor Darren, thank you so much for coming in today.
I appreciate you having me.
It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
We're going to have to do it again for sure.
Look forward to it.
Yeah. How can people find you?
They can find us. We're in Old Town Spring Heights. Our our website is www.trueryanspring.org. Trueryanspring.org. Or if not, just ask Scott. Scott knows which rock to find me under. And thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Loved it, man. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for watching this. If you would like and share and comment, and a special thank you to Bella Media for allowing us to produce this podcast. If you're looking to produce your own podcast, reach out, info@bellamedia.com.